In 1980, I was 13 years old, living at home with my parents and my little brother. We lived in a city called Conroe, which is about 60 miles north of Houston, Texas. For those of you who may not be familiar with Texas, Texas in general, especially in the Conroe area, is extremely humid and hot most of the year round. And one of the biggest attractions to Conroe is its lake. It has a massive lake that is extremely helpful to stave off the summer heat. So in general, especially for a young kid such as myself, 13 years old, you really wouldn't want to go out in the summer heat much, being 100 degrees and about 85% humidity, unless there was a really good reason to, unless you're going to the lake or it's in the evening or nighttime when the temperatures drop. And so, especially in the summer, there is a weird phenomena, at least for kids, where what we call June bugs, I don't know if they're actually called June bugs or not, but these flying beetles, dozens of them would fly around the exterior porch light of the house. And so my brother and I would go out and try to catch these beetles and just kind of watch them flying around, making this vortex around the exterior porch light. On one such evening, my little brother and I were out back around the porch light, catching and watching the June bugs. It was dusk and it was dark. The sky was dark, but it was not black. You know, that sort of dusk, strange transitional period where it's definitely dark, but it isn't black outside. So it was during this period of time we were in back. We were about to go in because it was getting relatively late and our parents were about to call us in anyhow, when my brother said, "Todd, look," my name being Todd. I looked up to see what he was pointing at, and above the house, literally about twice the size of our home, about 200 feet in the air, I would approximate, was a black disc. I should say a silent black disc. It was just stuck there. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making any sound. It was massive, silent, and extremely ominous. We could see it against the night sky because the night sky was actually brighter than the disc itself, being sort of silhouetted against the sky. We sat there stunned and shocked, just staring at this thing, expecting it to do something, and it did nothing. So at one point, we finally ran inside to get our parents. Now at that time, my mother was in the kitchen, and we screamed for her to come outside and have a look at this extremely strange black disc above our house. At first, like any parent would do, they thought we were crazy kids, imagining things. My mother definitely took her sweet time moving from the kitchen to the backyard to see this craft her crazy imaginative children were screaming about. It probably took her about 2 minutes to put down what she was doing in the kitchen and make her way to the backyard. And when she did, she saw what we saw, except the craft had completely transformed. Instead of being a black disc, it had moved away from the home. I can't tell you the distance or the direction. Being a child, now thinking back, I believe it would have been moving west. But off in the distance, now probably about 300 meters away, the entire craft was lit up like a rainbow. Bright, pulsating lights, red, blue, green, yellow, strobing and pulsating. It was the most bizarre spectacle you could imagine. My mother was completely shocked to actually see something and ran back inside to call the police. Now, at this point, the craft was even making the stereotypical cliche whirling sound. Not whirling like a helicopter at all. There was no wind. There was no lights or sound until this moment. And at that point, the craft suddenly shot into the sky in a white streak of light. Years later, recounting the image in my head and mentioning it to my brother, he agreed that it looked exactly like a shooting star, a falling meteor, only going the opposite direction. This thing lit up and shot like a shooting star straight up into space. My mother called the police. The police referred her to a UFO hotline of some kind based in Colorado. And of course, nothing came of it. To the best of our knowledge, none of the neighbors saw this. No one reported seeing the disc, or at least as far as we could tell. To our great surprise, my family would be sitting around the living room television set that same year when we would see a television program about an incident called the Cash Landrum incident. This incident was a UFO incident that took place in Dayton, Texas. 2 women and a young child were in a car traveling down a country road when they suddenly saw, levitating close to the road, a triangular, diamond-shaped, red glowing craft. They approached this craft as it was traveling relatively slowly and realized it was giving off immense heat. So much heat, in fact, that it melted their dashboard. The women were terrified and got out of their car due to the heat, and looking up at the craft, they realized the searing heat was too much. They did not pursue the craft, and soon thereafter realized there were military helicopters approaching the craft at high speed. The women then went on to describe that the helicopters seemed to be escorting the craft to an undisclosed location. The women's story would be scrutinized by skeptics and authorities alike for years to come. Despite critics' skepticism of the Cash Landrum incident, it is still regarded to be one of the most credible sightings of a UFO in recent history. Dayton, Texas is less than 50 miles from Conroe. I was 16 years old, living with my family in a town near Houston called The Woodlands. The Woodlands is an upper-class city in the forest. Literally, a city in the forest. Gas stations, neighborhoods, shopping malls, all in the middle of the woods. While I'm sure adults love The Woodlands for its beauty and kind of secluded atmosphere, a teenager gets really bored really quick. A lot of the teenagers that live in the Woodlands are spoiled, rotten little brats. And so getting into trouble is all you can do, both to irritate your parents, to rebel, and just to stay sane from the crazy boredom. At least a couple of times a week, I would hang out with my friends Dave and Carl. Carl had a car, so we would ride with him, and we'd go out at night, and we had what was known as a super soaker, which is a really powerful water gun. If you're not familiar with a super soaker, it basically squirts a mammoth-size spray of water about the size of a man's index finger, and it's powerful and it can spray very far. So once or twice a week, we'd go out late at night and find what we called our victims, which would be people who happen to have their windows rolled down on their cars, and we'd drive up next to them, cuss them out, and then spray them down with our super soakers. Now that I'm a few years older, I can see how absolutely crazy and how much of a jerk we really were for doing this. But it was just water, and aside from the cursing, it didn't really seem like that big of a deal. On this particular night, David and Carl were exceptionally lazy and didn't bring their super soakers, so I was the only one who had a water gun. Carl always drove because it was his car, and Dave always had to be back early because his parents had a curfew of 10 p.m. But tonight Dave didn't care, he was being extra rebellious, so the first time we were able to stay out as late as we wanted. So about 12:30 a.m., the streets were dead, no one was out in the Woodlands. Well, it's not really the Woodlands where we were at this time, it's the outskirts of the Woodlands. We finally found a pickup truck at an intersection at the red light, and as we approached the red light, I could see that the windows were down on the truck. So this was definitely going to be our next victim. I readied my water gun, held it down by my lap, and got ready to spray this huge guy. All we could see is the shadow of this massive dude at the wheel of this creepy truck. But still, I told Carl, get ready, because as soon as I was going to spray him, we usually take off. And we all got ready, giggling like little children, getting ready to do something bad. And then my friend Dave screamed, "Go!" And I turned toward the man and shouted, "Die, shithead!" and soaked him from head to toe with water. The whole thing took about 1 to 2 seconds. But to my surprise, he just sat there. He looked down at his lap at all the water all over him, but he didn't look at us. He didn't scream at us. He barely moved other than to look down at his lap. All of a sudden, he reached for his glove compartment, and my friend screamed, "He's going for a gun." So Carl floored it and ran the red light, taking off at a high rate of speed. Well, at this point, my window was down, so I could hear the absolute scream and roaring of that ancient, disgusting horror of a truck revving up its engine in pure insanity. Obviously, he was furious beyond belief. You could hear the tires screeching as the truck lunged toward us at a high rate of speed. The man in the truck stalked us at a high rate of speed for over 45 minutes. We drove all over the outskirts of Houston. We drove back to the Woodlands area. We could not ditch him. He was furious. At times he would get so close to our bumper, going in excess of speeds over 80 and 90 miles an hour. We thought he was trying to ram us. We didn't know what to do. Suddenly an idea popped into my head. I knew that if we stayed on I-45 north far enough, we would go out into the middle of nowhere where there were dozens and dozens of roads that led out into the country that were sketchy as hell, and we could definitely lose him down one of those roads. One of the roads I knew had a cemetery, and since I was familiar with the general area, that is the direction I told Carl to take. We sped down I-45 until we reached the turnoff road, and we turned off the road so quickly I thought we were going to go off the road at first. It was a dirt road that led down about a quarter mile to a very small cemetery nestled in the forest. At this point in the chase, we were so far ahead of the truck, I was certain that he didn't see us veer down this road. And sure enough, after a few minutes parked in this creepy cemetery at night, we saw the truck speed by us, and we felt safe for the first time in nearly an hour. But there we were, sitting in this creepy little cemetery, with no sound other than the chirping of the crickets, the cemetery tombstones, and God knows what else in that cemetery this late at night. We sat there for nearly 30 minutes, petrified in fear, just listening to each other's deep breathing and the crickets outside, before we finally left. We left without incident, and we couldn't help but think there was only one road leading into that cemetery. If that crazy lunatic in the truck would have happened to take that single road or saw us deviate down it, what would he have done to us? There would have been no way for us to escape, and he could have done anything he wanted to us in that creepy little cemetery.